Another day in Biel, so the round 3 of the Grandmaster Triathlon has been finished. As you already saw yesterday, we had a lot of exciting games in action in the GMT main tournament, and we also were witnesses to some of the historic moments, as for example, Don Mario Gukesh was not only able to take over the lead in the GMT tournament, but also become one of the youngest players in the history of chess to score the ELO rating over 2700. But of course, let's first have a look at what happened in the previous games. So we probably should start with the drawing games because Arkady Nadic was playing a game against Andrei Yesipenko. It wasn't really an eventful game because they played out the 4 knights variation, which at the professional level is considered to be quite drawish, but recently there have been some new ideas, so that's why Nadic felt that this is a good choice for this particular game. After bishop d3, d5, black has to challenge the center, e takes, short castle, there's various continuations at black's disposal. For example, bishop g4 has become quite trendy. Now, instead, after c takes on d5, bishop g5, white starts to challenge the pawn on d5 with ideas like bishop takes on f6, knight e5. So here, after bishop e6, which is one of the major continuations, Nadic was following Andrei Yesipenko's game earlier this June against Eltaj Safarli. After knight b5, c5, black takes care of the d4 square, and after a3, b4, the position pretty much inevitably simplifies. Because if black twice takes on b4, white can at least take back the pawn on a7 and have a normal game. After bishop b6, capture on c5, c3, white secures the square on d4. But now after h6, the position was simplifying. Bishop d7, Yesipenko tried to, again, repeat the position against Safarli, played earlier this June. Bishop e7, queen f3, white is thinking about some tactical ideas like knight f5, rook e7, try to get to the mate on h7 as he would form a battery. However, rook e8, they were following this game I already mentioned before, Safarli against Yesipenko this June. And here after knight f5, bishop f5, the position pretty much inevitably simplified because the bishop on h4 now is under attack, so Nadic didn't really think of anything better than to take on f6, the position, followed by a couple of trades, and in the end, a draw was agreed after several moves. So again, to remind you, the tournament system, you have to make 40 moves before you're allowed to make a draw, or there needs to be a threefold repetition. Draw was agreed in a couple of moves. The second game of round 3 was Vincent Keimer against Nodirbek Abdusatorov. Here Vincent tried to play out some sort of Queen's Gambit declined structure. Bishop b4, white is fighting for the center, so black understandably is challenging it. And here white decided to play a rather rare move, bishop d2, because the main move here in this position is bishop d3. All of these lines have been tested many times before. After bishop d2, here Abdusatorov took on d4, and Vincent, instead of playing e takes on d4, going for the isolated queen's pawn structure and perhaps some attacking chances of the king side, decided to go for a positional approach. He gave a check on a4, and now his idea was try to capture the bishop, as that's a check. After knight c6, knight e4, this pretty much forces black to play bishop d7, and after the trade on c6, black has to include bishop takes on c3, bishop takes on c3, and bishop takes on c6. Well, apparently so far they've been following the game of Arjun Erigaisi against Levon Aronian from last year's Rapid, where Erigaisi did play queen a5 and claim a little advantage. However, Vincent played queen a3. So maybe what we have to mention here that after queen a5, if black responds with b6, then after queen a3, knight e4, in some variations, the bishop on c6 is not well defended, and black cannot easily castle short. Now instead, queen a3 was played to keep the black king in the center, and here after the very powerful knight e4, Keimer realized that probably accepting the pawn on g7 is risky because black would play moves like rook g8, bishop d4, think about moves like queen h4, long castle, the white king is in the center, and things can become quite dangerous for white. Now instead, he had to play rook d1, and after knight c3, queen takes on c3, after a game in the post-game interview, Winston revealed he simply missed black's last move, queen f6, which apparently just equalizes the game. He had anticipated short castle, and then after c takes, bishop d5 cannot be played due to e4. Black loses a piece, and then after e takes on d5, at least white keeps some chances to attack this pawn on d5. Think about moves like rook d4, bishop e2, short castle, and try to count the pawn. However, after queen f6, the position was rather uneventful, and some trades happened, which pretty much inevitably led to a draw. So black has slightly worse pawn structure, but white is unable to exploit it. The draw was agreed shortly after reaching the second time control, so there was not much to see. And again, the players had to make physically 40 moves and agree to a draw, because none of the sides can make a progress. Now, we also had two decisive games in round 3, and probably one of the most notable games of the round was Domagoj Gukesh scoring a very important victory with the black color, which not only allowed him to take the lead in the overall rankings of the GMT, but also become the youngest Indian player in the history of chess to cross 2700 ELO, and also one of the youngest players in the world to do that. So here, again, we had Queen's Gambit declined, c takes, e takes, bishop g5. Now, there's many ways how black can play. Here, Gukesh decided to play a bit more aggressive. Bishop b4, e3, h6. Directly asking white questions. What are you going to do here? Because bishop f6, queen f6, white apparently cannot help much. White decided to play bishop h4, accepted the challenge, and after g5, knight e4 here, perhaps knight e2 was slightly precise move, but I mean, this is still theory. The big point is now to black's h5, white has access to h4, and after knight g3, g takes on h4, white always has knight takes on h5. But rook c1 also is perfectly playable. Now Gukesh played h5 to challenge the bishop on g3, so naturally h3, h4, black is happy to take on g3. So f3 was played by the top Vietnamese grandmaster. And now after knight takes on g3, h takes on g3, c6, here the first critical moment arose right now. So white decided to play g4, h4, g3, which probably was not the best choice. In the live stream studio, we're discussing about possibilities for white to play knight h3, short castle f4, which also later by one of the leading Indian grandmasters, Surya Ganguly, was acknowledged as a very interesting way to continue. However, white decided to play really inspiring chess. He played king d2, insisting to grab center with moves like f4, knight f3, and try to grab the center. However, as it would turn out later, the king on d2 is not where it belongs. So after a couple of moves, the position led to the following moment: f4, queen f3, f5. And you could already see that white is in trouble because the king on d2 is not where it belongs, so naturally Gukesh was seeking ways to open the position and get to the white king. After knight h3, c5, f6, g5, the Vietnamese grandmaster tried to complicate things. Now black is already threatening to capture the knight on h3, snatch the pawn on g5 for free. So this is where Le Quang Liem felt the king needs to be relocated to a safety. After c takes, rook c8, black continued the attack. And here, after king b1, the young Indian grandmaster was able to unleash a very powerful idea of bishop takes on a3, which probably was not properly evaluated by the Vietnamese grandmaster. Now here, the big point is that after b takes, queen takes on a3, black's attack is too strong. For example, white gives a check here, queen d2 here, and black starts a very powerful attack. So if white takes it, think about moves like rook c6, rook b6, think about moves like bishop f5 check. And in the live stream studio, we discussed queen a2 as a defensive resource. However, after queen b4 check, king a1, knight a5, black seals the deal. Knight b3 is killing, the knight is under attack, and any knight e5 is queen takes on d4, and white's position collapses. So this didn't happen, and Le Quang Liem had to do something else. So he played knight b5. He gave up a pawn, but tried to complicate matters. After the trade, another accurate move by the Vietnamese grandmaster to try to push away the black queen from reaching the b4 square, where it could go for a very deadly attack. Bishop b5, bishop d6, and here white was doing rather well, and actually he sacrificed the second pawn to complicate matters. Otherwise, you look at this knight on h3, it's not doing anything. The pawn on g5 is also not moving anywhere. So also after g6, f takes, knight g5. Now white is down 2 pawns, but the f pawn is very strong. And this is the moment when Gukesh pretty much made the only mistake in the game. He rushed with queen a4, which is a normal-looking move. However, it was more precise to start with rook c8, keep control of some of the squares, and only then proceed with queen a4 and queen b4. Now, the big difference is that after queen a4, here white had access to very precise rook c1, giving him very good chances to escape with a draw. Now he's threatened to play f7, knight e6, and most likely he would be able to save the game. Now, after knight e6, which was a mistake, rook c8, the players were approaching a time trouble, queen d1, queen d7, black decided to keep the queens on the board. White already was in immense time trouble. Queen g4, knight c4, and the final mistakes were made by white, taking on c4, leaving the white king very vulnerable. Now think about moves like c3, queen b5, and add on top of that the two extra pawns that black has. After rook takes on h4, c3, b takes, queen b5, black already had a winning attack. So the game didn't continue for much. Queen a2 check, king d1, queen b3, rook e8. Now instead of taking the pawn on c3, black simply collected the knight for free. After f7, queen e6 already was a possibility to simplify the position. However, the young Indian grandmaster was very principled, and he actually went for the checkmate. Very nice move, king c7, allowing white to play rook h7, and now a beautiful mating net started. Now again, after queen e1 check, king d3 is rook e3, the pawn on c3 falls, and after king c2, black simply mates white. Now the big idea is, for example, king c4, b5, king d5, queen b3, that's mate on the board. So a fantastic game by Gukesh, who scored one of the most important victories so far in his career. Now, the final game of the round 3 was the longest game of the round, which lasted about 6 hours. Yesterday ended with a drama. So Salem Saleh, the leading Emirati grandmaster, was playing against Gata Kamsky. And here, after d4, Kamsky played the very provocative Dutch defense variation. After bishop f4, knight f6, e3, g6. This is essentially the variation that led Gata winning the triathlon to a victory last year by beating Vincent Kammer with the black color in the final round. Now, after h4, white was threatening to play h5 and try to sacrifice the exchange, which prompted the American grandmaster to respond with h6, so that after h5, he can defend his kingside by g5. So Salem Saleh played out the position in a very interesting way. However, at some point, one couldn't help but feel that something is slightly wrong, because after knight h3, bishop h2, followed by knight f4, it felt a bit artificial, and black was doing all right. Black was really doing all right, having secured all the critical squares at the king side, and now trying to do something at the queen side. After bishop c4, a6, the big question was at which moment white is going to push d5. So after d5, black wants to respond with knight e5, and that's why here Salem Saleh was preparing this. He played a3, bishop a2, and he's thinking for the right moment to play d5. Now that after knight e5, the bishop on c4 is not under attack. This prompted Kamsky to close the position with d5, and again, thinking about the queenside assault with b5, b4. Now the game started to become really sharp. After knight e3, the pawn on c7 is under attack. Kamsky defended it. Queen g3, white decided to go for assault in the center. Think about moves like f3, e4, knight f4, rook e1, e4. And at some point, the game already reached a time trouble. So naturally, white is trying to start an attack at the king side. Black is trying to open the queen side. Rook e1, b4, a4, knight e7. And here in the post-game interview, Salem Saleh confessed he felt he's so much better here, but he couldn't find the way. And of course, later, after the game, we'd also check the game with an engine. There was no direct continuation. There's no clear path to the victory. However, also the engines approved that white is definitely much better. Queen f2, bishop a6, g4. This was played by Salem Saleh, which he said after the game he was not very happy with, but he had to do something. And here, after f takes on g4, rook g1, things started to go really, really wild because white sacrificed the pawn on f3. He wants to get to the pawn on g6. And after bishop c4, probably Salem Salek missed an opportunity to make one of the most exciting moves of the tournament. He could have sacrificed a piece. After rook takes on g4, he could have ignored the bishop. And the big point is, after bishop a2, just calmly play b3. I mean, welcome to the 21st century. White wants to capture the bishop back, king b2, and the attack at the king side continues. So that was incredibly difficult move to pick up. He didn't find it. So after bishop b3, which was technically a mistake, Kamsky had an excellent chance to take over the game had he played knight f6 with the idea that after f takes on g4, push in the center the pawn e5. However, after bishop b3, that was a mistake. Kamsky now played knight f6 with the idea to push e5, but now after queen c2, e5, the position was in favor for white. After take it, knight e5, rook e5, there was a lot of skirmishes in the time trouble, but in the end, we just fast forward this position. This led to an endgame. After rook b6, black is threatening rook c6. Knight g7, very powerful move by Kamsky, threatening rook c6. Queen b1, it was incredibly difficult to evaluate the arising complications. So here, Salem Salek decided to enter an endgame where he felt he has some minor chances to win the game, but normally it should be a draw. Now, we reach this position, f takes, rook c6, g5, knight e4, take it, and rook f1. Now, there's a material equality on the board, but there's a high chance that the position is going to liquidate because all black needs to do is trade all of those queenside pawns, and of course the pawn on h4 as well. So here, after king g6, rook f8, c4, take it, rook c4, black is threatened with knight c5 check, bishop g1, b3, bishop d4, knight c5, and unfortunately for white, he cannot play king e3 due to the I think actually king e3, due to the knight takes on a4, and the threat is to eliminate all the pawns and secure a draw. Now he took on c5, and this position was evaluated by Salem Salek as slightly unpleasant for black. Salem praised in post-game interview rook a8 move. The idea was to provoke black to play king h5 and only then play rook b8. And now it actually was quite tricky because here apparently the most precise move that black could have secured the draw was king takes on h4. And now the big idea, rook b5, black plays rook c2, and after rook takes on b3, play rook c4. Oh, quite difficult to pick up. So what Kamsky did here, he played rook c4 right away. Now there's a major difference because after rook b5, rook a4, rook takes on d5, this was probably quite an unpleasant surprise to Kamsky because he cannot take the pawn on h4 because white enters a winning pawn endgame. Now initially we also missed it during the live stream interview, live stream coverage, because after king c3, a3, b takes, you can see the black king is not in the so-called square. He cannot stop the pawn. So black cannot do that, so he had to step back king g6. Salem Salek proposed maybe king h6 was more precise. And the critical moment arose here, so White was definitely playing it for the win because he has an extra pawn. Rook a2, all Kamsky needs to do is trade the a pawn for the b pawn. And now a3, b4, rook h2, king b3, the critical moment arose here. Now, the position is still drawn, but by only one move. So Kamsky had to pick up king e6, which was pretty, perhaps, difficult move to pick up right now. And the big point is, if white plays a rook a5, you just play king d6. Just a second, not king d6. I think it's just a check. Here, now you play king d6. And now after rook a3, there's always this motive. You need to evaluate if the black king is cut off. So here, specifically here, black can give a check first on h2, king b3, I take on h5, put the king on b8 and claim a draw. And if white plays here, white is never in time to cut off the black king because the pawn on b4 needs to be protected, making this a rather simple draw. So this was one attempt for the Emirati grandmaster had Kamsky picked up the correct continuation king e6. And now, for example, if he would try cut off the king by rook d1, this would be a draw with the move a2. For example, h6, rook h6, king a2, rook h3 is a draw which perhaps looks a bit difficult, but rook h8, king b3, rook b8 is a textbook draw which you can find in Mark Dvoretsky's endgame manual. Unfortunately for American grandmaster and his fans, he mixed up. He mixed up this idea and he played rook h3 check first. Now the idea that after king e6, he probably anticipated rook a5, but only to miss rook d1. Remember again, the ordered moves sometimes in chess really doesn't matter. After a couple of moves, black's position already was unsavable. Rook d4, inevitably white trades the h-pawn for the a-pawn, and the biggest problem here for black, for example, here, if black takes it, this would be a draw if the black rook was here, not here, because then you would play rook b8 and claim a theoretical draw. However, that's why the rook on a7 is too close for the white king. Now, Kamsky tried to seek some tricks, provoke white to play h8, rook h8, and claim exactly that position. However, all it comes down is to order the moves, and here Salem Saleh forced black to take on h7, king a3. Now again you see rook a7, king b3. The black rook cannot be positioned on rook a8, rook b8. And after a couple of moves here, Kamsky had seen it enough because this position inevitably will reach the so-called bridge. And here you see the results of round 3. Gukesh scores a victory against Le Quang Liem, becomes one of the youngest players in the history of chess to reach 2700 ELO. Salem Saleh also scored very important victory in the rook endgame, showing again studying games because this is where it really matters. Vincent Kammer against Abdusatorov and Arkady Naiditsch against Andrei Yasipenko finished in a draw. And now also let's have a look at the overall rankings. You see Gukesh is leading the tournament with 16.5 points thanks to his victory of Le Quang Liem. Le Quang Liem is in the second place, 15 points. Yasipenko, third place, 14.5 points. And then we have Naiditsch, Salem Saleh, another back Abdusatorov, trailing behind. And unfortunately for Kammer and Gata Kamsky, the tournament is not so successful so far. So the action will continue on Sunday with the Blitz tournament. The players will play between each other 14 rounds or 2 double round-robin tournaments with a time control of 3 minutes plus 2 seconds. The scoring system will be 1 point for the victory, half a point for a draw, 0 points obviously for the loss. And then after that, they will have a rest day and the action will resume with round 4 on Tuesday. Thank you for watching this. Follow us live stream and have a great day.